Good morning, everyone. At this time, we will call the November 26, 2024 Local Superintendent Advisory Council meeting to order. And to begin our meeting, we invite Commissioner Fletcher to provide an update on the Kentucky Department of Education.
Thank you, Chair Biggerstaff. I appreciate the opportunity. Again, it's good to see everyone. Still trying to get used to this chair as opposed to that chair, so it's really nice. As a matter of fact, I think I had 2 or 3 meetings where I referred to myself as Superintendent Fletcher this past month. So still getting that used to that idea. But again, it's good to be here with everyone, and looking forward to our meeting today, especially going through what we have on the agenda, getting some input from each of you. But just as far as an update from here, first of all, from the superintendent standpoint, from the commissioner standpoint, you caught it there. I gave us foreshadowing already. I've been visiting some schools, had some great visits. I've been in Spencer, Trimble, Logan, been to the Ignite Academy. I have Jefferson County coming up pretty soon, and also Floyd County. I'm going to the Floyd County ATC. I think I've got a few of you scheduled coming up in January as we move forward. Still trying to find time to make it down there, Will, to Greene County for your opening on Sunday. If I can do that, I'm going to see what the schedule looks like once I survive Thanksgiving, I guess. But again, appreciate all the invitations and being able to be with kids. That's the best part. I will say that on the cover of KSBA, I was sitting in the floor with some students. All 3 of those students were necessary to get me out of the floor. So, but it was great. That's the best part of this job, is being able to see kids. A few other things to bring you up to speed on. We've talked about this a couple times. Includes the SEEK Roadshow. We finally have some dates for that, and we were struggling to get 2 co-ops together at one time. But we do have the SEEK Roadshow scheduled. And again, this is for superintendents, and also if you want to invite your finance officers. But the dates for that is coming up. The very first one is at Southeast South Central on December 13th. KEDC, Kentucky Education Development Cooperative, on December 19th. KVEC on January 22nd. OVEC on the 29th of January. The Green River on February 5th, CKEC on the 13th of February, NKEC on the 19th of February, and our last one is at WKEC at Murray on the 26th of February. So we're trying to get where we can have everyone. You don't have to travel quite as far to be located around your co-ops. But again, we're really trying to cater those to questions that you may have that's maybe central to your region. As maybe things that are more indicative of maybe you find this issue at WKEC, whereas that might not be the same issue at KVEC. But also, too, giving that general overview of SEEK and how different parts impact it as we move forward. There's always discussions of how do we tweak SEEK or how do we change SEEK. I think this will help us as far as superintendents and also our finance officers to have a better understanding. And of course, this was a recommendation from superintendent. So I'm looking forward to these. Of course, I won't make it to all of those. I'll try to make it to a few, just that way I can be there too. But really thankful to our OFO. I want to take the time to thank Associate Commissioner Matt Ross and Che Ritter also too for their work for putting these together. Also too, framework. Today we'll have a discussion from our OAA today about our framework. And if you remember the process of when we look at our new accountability model, we started out with prototypes, which is more of a general direction of how we're going, to a framework. So we put a little bit more on paper for you to look at. And just as far as want you to know what the process is, this is Framework 1.0. We're still looking for suggestions. So we're going to listen to what you have to say today. And then also, too, we've already had the Kentucky United We Learn Council, whereas they do a lot of the initial framework and what they're putting into us. We've also gathered their input on a 1.0. We'll also go to the talk with the Kentucky Board of Education about their input. And then after that, we're going to do another framework, 2.0. And then there's going to be town halls in January. And these are very loosely scheduled. So we're trying to make sure that we solid all these up. But the process will be meeting with co-ops during the day, then doing a town hall in the evenings to allow people to come in. And again, it's a way of presenting what that accountability model looks like. The other part of that town hall is asking local districts to come in and talk about their local accountability model. That way, when people say, okay, what exactly do you mean by local accountability? Well, here's an example. I'm not saying everybody in the state's local accountability model needs to look like that, but it gives people ideas of what it looks like. So there's some great local accountability models out there. And as far as right now, the schedule for that is Wednesday, January 8th at NKEC, and I am conducting all of these. Unless something comes up, I'm the one conducting all of these with members of our staff here. So we're at NKEC on January 8th. On January 15th in the morning, I'm doing the KEDC board meeting, then the CKEC board meeting that afternoon, then the town hall that evening. So it's a busy day. January 16th, Jefferson County. January 21st is Grec. January 22nd is a KEDC town hall. So we had to schedule the town hall separately from the board meeting there. Then on the 23rd is KVEC, and 27th is a virtual Spanish town hall. January 29th is OVEC. January 30th is WKEC. And then we just, I think we finalized Southeast South Central for January 7th. So again, those are the town hall times to gather input from people to see what their thoughts are. Some great discussions already, but again, I thought it was very important that we get the ideas more refined and on paper. You can see that. Still a lot of discussion, still a lot of decisions to be made as we move forward with this accountability model. So with that being said, those are a couple things I'd be happy to entertain. We'll save the accountability questions till later, if you don't mind, since that's up on the agenda. But if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer those if it pleases the chair. Anything at all?
Anybody have anything? Thank you, Dr. Fletcher. Appreciate that. Now we have one regulation for our review and action. We welcome Dr. Kelly Foster from the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support to present this item.
Good morning. It's been a while, but since I've been in front of LSAC, it's great to see everybody, and I hope that you all are ready for a few days off and Thanksgiving with your family and friends. So I know everybody here at KDE is looking forward to it, and we appreciate you guys coming to Frankfort today and to give us input. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a new regulation. It's 704 KAR 3:315, certification of non-public schools. And we have a long history of working with the Non-Public Schools Association, and we have been working with them since 1992. So I want to give you a little bit of background about that relationship and how we work with them and what information we bring to the state board, and then why we're asking to move forward with this regulation. So KRS 156.160 provides that non-public schools may voluntarily comply with the guidelines established by the Kentucky Board of Education and be certified by the board. As I mentioned earlier, since 1992, the Kentucky Board of Education has collaborated with the Kentucky Non-Public Schools Commission to complete the voluntary certification process. Typically in April or June is when I bring a list from the Kentucky Non-Public Schools Association to the Kentucky Board of Education for approval. Sometimes it's April, but most of the time it is June. Next slide, please. In the reg, there are some sections that I want to go through. The first one is the definition section, and just looking at what is a non-public school. So a non-public school means any private, parochial, home-based, or church school. A public charter school, as defined by KRS 160.1592, is not a non-public school. Next slide, please. Section 2 talks about the procedures for certification. So currently, the non-public school must seek accreditation from an approved accreditor. The non-public school must apply for voluntary certification through the Non-Public Schools Committee. The Non-Public Schools Committee annually produces a list of non-public schools for consideration by the Kentucky Board of Education. And then upon recommendation of the Non-Public Schools Committee, the KBE may revoke certification at any point during the school year. Section 3 really gets into the meat of the regulation, and this has been a very collaborative process with the Non-Public Schools Committee. We're really trying to put some formality around their work and our relationship with them. So in section 3 of the reg, you will see the new requirements for the Non-Public Schools Committee. So first, they shall adopt a policy for screening and selection of eligible accrediting agencies. They must also adopt a policy for recommending non-public schools to the Kentucky Board of Education for certification. They must also adopt a policy for recommending certification revocation. We will provide technical assistance to them as we have in the past, but we will help guide them in developing these policies. And then the last piece in section 3 that I want to highlight is that annually they must submit the 3 required policies to the KBE for review and approval. Section 4 of the reg talks about additional requirements around making this information viewable for the public. So the Non-Public Schools Committee, as well as KDE, shall post on each of their websites the following information: the name of the certified non-public school, the public school district in which the non-public school is physically located, the grade level served, the physical address, the telephone number, the email address, the school's website URL, and the expiration date for the non-public school's voluntary certification. They must also post on their websites a list of the accrediting agencies and the new policies. And as I said, this is a new regulation. We are trying to put some formality around the processes of what they bring to the Kentucky Board of Education to approval. I'll also say this is a little bit, you're very familiar with our relationship with the Kentucky High School Athletic Association. And so this is much like that in trying to put some procedures, policies in place of our relationship with the Non-Public Schools Committee. So I'll be glad to take any questions.
Have any questions?
So just one question. How long has this again been in state statute? And a follow-up to that, how many schools typically apply for accreditation on an annual basis?
So we have had this relationship with them since 1992,
Okay.
and there really hasn't been any changes since what was established in 1992. So that's one of the main reasons that we started conversation with them about thinking about regulation, thinking about having processes for them, very clear and written out and public record, and ensuring in turn that what they're bringing to us to bring to the state board is of high quality. And then it varies from year to year, how many. Sometimes it may just be a handful, and then sometimes it could be up to 15 or 20. And that's basically determines on what year they were accredited before. And if it's a 1-year accreditation, or sometimes it's a 3 or 4 year. So once again, I think this will help them have some concrete policies and procedures to ensure what we're bringing to the state board is of high quality.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And being heard, do I have a motion to recommend approval of 704 KR 3315 certification of non-public schools?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Tilford. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Have a second. At this time, we will have a roll call vote.
Brian Alexander,
Yes.
Kirk Biggerstaff,
Yes.
Harry Burchett,
Yes.
Tom Cochran,
Yes.
David Cox,
Yes.
Will Hodges,
Yes.
Sheila Mitchell,
Yes.
Russ Tilford,
Yes.
David Trimble,
Yes.
Henry Webb.
Yes.
And it is approved. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you all.
Appreciate that. To conclude our meeting, Dr. Jennifer Stafford from the Office of Assessment Accountability will provide an update on the Kentucky United We Learn Assessment Accountability Framework. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. How are you all?
Good, thank you.
We have been in a process of developing a reimagined assessment and accountability system now for a couple of years. We've been working with the Kentucky United We Learn Council since November of 2022, based on work that was previously started in 2020 and continued through the council. If we'll go to the first slide. Today, what we're going to talk about is a framework. We've been in the process of developing multiple prototypes, and that those prototypes have had 4 versions of the prototype. And we had a convening in October with our Kentucky United We Learn members, and have moved to a vision of assessment and accountability that includes some core values, for reimagined assessment and accountability systems, KDE supports and local assurances, and building local accountability into through phases, and local and federal assessments within the accountability. So we're going to talk through that framework this morning and have a good discussion around each of those different parts. So just as a reminder on the next slide, that our moonshot is to build a prosperous Kentucky where we'll launch an accountability system that is meaningful and useful to our learners. Now, when we're really looking at the vision of changing education for each and every student, so that each and every student would have access and opportunities to engage in vibrant learning experiences. Around the vision, we continue to encourage innovation in assessments, and we're going to talk a lot around some flexibilities that are in the current framework, and also moving into and collaborating with our communities. And in Kentucky, we really got a vote of confidence in this last election, and we want to continue on that good path. So bringing in our communities and working along with our leaders in our communities. Well, if we'll go to the next slide. As a reminder, we're working toward legislation for consideration in the 2026 legislative session. Multiple pieces and moving parts have to come together in order to have a successful legislation in that 2026 legislative session. So it seems like it's a year away, and it doesn't seem very long, but that year will go by very quickly. So if we look at the next slide, when we met with the council, what we heard from them is that they're around several themes, and the themes. The first one is about flexibility, comparability, and confidence. So with a reimagined assessment and accountability system should allow for maximum flexibility while maintaining and meeting the federal requirements. So we're looking at a streamlined federal accountability system, giving the local autonomy and flexibility to design meaningful systems for each community. And so what this means, when we have local accountability, we're going to move away from the standardization and that comparability from one local district to the next. And that's okay. That's okay when we move away from that, because we're balancing the comparability piece with the federal system, and then the less comparable with the local system. So there's a balance there, so that there would be information at both levels, both a statewide system with the indicators at the federal piece, and then you've got your local decision making around the indicators around that local. With the flexibility within the local accountability system, really bringing into light the context of your local community, so that you bring together leaders within your communities and families, and talking through what's important to them, providing their input into your local accountability system. The next big theme was to trust and empower, that came out of the discussions, that the KDE and local districts will work together to build trust in local systems, and leading toward improvement work. And together, leaders at all levels will look at and build upon innovations happening in many of our Kentucky districts in order to develop these rich, robust local systems for for assessment and accountability. And then finally, connecting to grow. KDE will play a critical role in connecting districts and supporting mutual learning processes, bringing together districts and empowering the teachers and leaders to learn from one another, reducing the competition where that we kind of see now and have happening now, but learning from each other in meaningful ways and connecting districts and supporting the local shared efforts to build and implement these local accountability systems that reflect their priorities again on within their communities. Next slide.
If I could add to that,
Sure.
please. Thank you, Jennifer. When we talk about the Connect to Grow, it's really, how do you connect districts with similar type of resources? Connect districts with similar types of maybe geography of what type of opportunities they have when you develop a local accountability system, because you're going to have, as far as vibrant learning experiences, how many opportunities do they have for work-based learning? Whereas others may be looking more like defenses of learning. Others may be looking, so what exactly does that look like maybe in a very small district in the rural parts of our state versus maybe something that's in more of a suburban area? So there's some things there. The Connect to Grow is how do we work with each other to develop those. Now, again, keep in mind when we're asking districts to work together, we're not saying that 5 districts get together and have the exact same local accountability model. We're not saying that at all. What we're saying is how do we learn from each other to develop one that also reflects what our local community wants? What type of questions are our parents asking? What do they want to hear from us? What do our local businesses, what do they want to hear from us? We've seen districts that have included even things such as their absenteeism numbers, student well-being. And when I say student well-being is what percentage of our students are involved in extracurricular or co-curricular activities, which is a great indicator for success afterwards. But to share those ideas are great. Others, there are excellent models of portraits of a learner and those competencies that people that our districts are assessing as they go through and getting those defenses of learning. How, if that's a model that you're looking at and incorporating that, how do you really make your portrait of a learner come to life and seeing those districts work together? But also to that trust part, we're trusting. As a district, if I was sitting in a superintendent seat, I'm trying to build trust with my local community because I'm trying to get their input and trying to get back what exactly do they want to hear. And also to trust with that, we want to make sure our business leaders that make sure that KDE is also working closely with you to help out any way possible. Then the last part I'll make that I kind of went in reverse order. When you talk about the flexibility, we want to try to make that local accountability piece as flexible as possible, while also ensuring vibrant learning experiences. What are relevant learning experiences? One of the things that we haven't included in the vibrant learning is a possibility. Do we include upper level coursework as a part of that vibrant learning? Just how do we define that as we move forward? But again, I think we can all agree that things like work-based learning, internships, apprenticeships, anything where there's capstones of learning, where they're actually going out and doing job shadowing, those are all very relevant and very great, vibrant learning experiences. And then maybe there's some ideas we haven't thought about. So that gives districts the flexibility to develop those from a local level. But from the comparability level, we still have to name CSI, TSI, ATSI. And so we have so much invested as a state in numeracy, literacy. So we still focus on that. What are our reading scores? What does growth look like? And one of the common things I hear from a lot of superintendents is we really want to focus on that student growth. Where did you get the child and where did you take them? And I hear that quite often. So again, there's a lot of excitement here, in my opinion, on what this looks like and where it could be, but also too, trying to refine it down as much as possible. And also too, we still have federal requirements, and we can talk about those too as we move on. But anyway, thank you, Dr. Stafford. I apologize.
Well, and that leads exactly to the next slide about, so it's a perfect segue into the KDE supports. So looking at really connecting and bringing districts together in this networked peer approach, where KDE fosters that collaboration and that network so that our leaders can work together and to learn from each other, because we've got districts who are leading some of this local accountability efforts who have learned a lot across the years. And so really tapping into the strengths and sharing those among leaders and among teacher leaders, developing state tools that will help implement processes and helping districts utilize resources from each other, from the state, and then districts using approved local assessments in place of some of the currently state required measures. Other supports for the accountability system, the local accountability system, every 3 years, the state will conduct a third-party review to identify best practices and provide feedback for continuous improvement. So bringing in an external auditor or an external person just to provide feedback.
And to add to that, on that external review, what we've talked about is like, what are the exemplars across their state when it comes to maybe collaboration with community? If we want, if as you go through identifying areas like these are what we would consider exemplars when it comes to portraits of a learner and how they're implemented. That way there's a resource for districts to say, okay, these are some, if you want to look at some examples of how everything from portraits of a learner to collaboration with communities or competency-based systems, or, you know, and the list goes on of having that external reviewer to, they're not coming in to accredit your system. They're basically coming in and say, okay, these are exemplars across our state that we connect with each other and say, these are things that we can work on together. So again, that's the point of that external feedback, but also too, to give us an outside person or outside entity to come in and say, these are recommendations that we can give you. That's up to you how you implement, because it's still your local accountability system. But again, making sure that we can connect to others about what exactly those best practices look like in different aspects of that local accountability model.
And as far as the local assurances that districts and school leaders would work together with their communities. So there would need to determine the local priorities, bringing forth those voices from our parents, from our students, from our community leaders, from our faith leaders, business leaders, and having that inclusive process where that we get deep, meaningful, rich conversations around that local accountability. Providing data publicly, putting out information that is shows the district's strengths as well as areas of growth, and also have that information and data reported by student demographic groups. So if you have different, both not only our ethnic groups, but also our gender as well, providing information publicly that would be reported by those different student demographic groups that you would have in your districts. Then the next slide, with a new type of system, we wouldn't just say this is happening and just go forward and do it. There would be a phased in approach that would need to build capacity. With the phases, there would need to be a pilot phase, continuing work with small groups and representative groups of schools or districts. We've have the local labs of learning who have been leading the efforts on local accountability. Working with them, continuing to learn from each other, gathering feedback and identifying those challenges, and learning from what they've done and the good practices that they've put in place. Then expand from that pilot group to scale that so that more districts are entering the space of local accountability and applying those lessons that have been learned from those pilot groups and the local labs of learning. And then third phase would be to implement this local accountability statewide. So we're talking about multiple years of building capacity within our school leaders, within our district leaders, and then within our community leaders as well, because of this being an innovative practice. So those are the key, the core values, the assurances, and then the phased in approach. If we look at the next slide, then you see how the federal and local systems could work together. So looking at the federal system to have stability and have the fundamentals, and the local to have the flexibility to be nimble and to have changes made to it as you work through the local accountability. What may think works for one group may not work for the group moving forward. So there are abilities to be changed within the local system, providing that nimbleness and that flexibility within the local system. So looking specifically at on the next slide, looking at local assessments and accountability, reducing the amount of state required assessments that from what's currently being administered, having the social studies and writing, a offered state developed assessment in grades 3 through 10 to be utilized within the local accountability systems. Or if the district was in the place that they had competency-based, performance-based assessments, they could use their own local assessments for the social studies and writing to be included in their local accountability system. So again, the flexibility, the choice within the school district to utilize their own social studies and writing assessments at grades 3 through 10, or utilize a state assessment at those grades and then report those. Focus on vibrant learning experiences. The district or school would provide the opportunities for their students to engage in a variety of types of vibrant learning experiences. And again, this would be a local decision and local created opportunities for their students, and then reporting those. Now, a district may choose to, within the vibrant learning experience, present the percentage of students just involved in the vibrant learning experiences. If a district had more advanced and more experiences with vibrant learning experience, a district may choose to look at the quality of the vibrant learning experiences and the performance on those. So again, the opportunity and the autonomy at the local level to develop assessments, opportunities for the students to engage in these different exciting experiences. The next slide talks about, again, opportunities for the local accountability to include the climate and safety survey, looking at the statewide administration of a common survey that could be included in the local accountability system, but actually reported publicly. Then offering from the state level a series of interim assessments throughout the year. So in reading and math, offer multiple interim assessments in grades 3 through 8 or 3 through 10 to be that could be included in local accountability systems, but then have a summative assessment that would be utilized in the federal accountability system for grades 3 through 8 and 10. So again, having the opportunity to provide these from the state level provides a comprehensive system in reading and math that would be aligned to the Kentucky academic standards. So the local district would not have to go forward and purchase their own formative assessments. The state would provide those, so the districts would have that funding available to focus on a local a local priority. So it would free up some of those funds for other innovative practices. And then with the local, again, based on conversations with their community, reflecting their own local context and their local priorities within the local accountability system. Just a couple of more, transitioning to federal accountability. And these are, again, those streamlined requirements for the federal system, making them available for the federal and meeting the requirements for as it stands, the current federal statutes as they stand now with the ESSA. Again, with reading and math, provide that through year multiple interim assessments with a summative assessment at the end to be utilized for federal accountability in grades 3 through 8 and 10. And again, that those interim assessments would be utilized for only instructional purposes at the district level. Transitioning away from the change element that's in our current accountability system and replacing that with growth in reading and math at the elementary levels and middle levels, grades 3 through 8. And then no changes to the progress toward English language proficiency. And on the next slide, no change to transition readiness or graduation rate, but continuing with the administration of the science assessments to be included in federal accountability at grades 5, 8, and 10. Now, continuing to offer assessments at grades, at those off grades. So grades 3, 4, 6, 7, and 9, and allowing the district's decision to include those in local accountabilities or not. And I think that that shift, that is a shift. That's not a typo on that next slide. Is that the science would be shifted to 5, 8, and 10 instead of the current 4, 7, and 11 as it is now. With the shift of the social studies and writing to a local accountability that frees up some time at those upper levels so that the science could be administered at those levels. Now, particularly in science, to note that it is a federal requirement that the state administer a science assessments once per grade band. So once elementary, once middle, once high, and report those results. So a common statewide science assessment statewide that is reported at least once within that. So that's a federal requirement for those. And then of these federal pieces, then the identification of our schools in need of support. So out of these federal pieces, you would get, or it would yield those classifications for continuous support and improvement, targeted support and improvement, and then additional targeted and support and improvement. So that's a very high level of our current discussion of framework 1.0. So we had 4 versions of the prototypes, and this is the first one out of the gate. So we're looking forward to the conversation around 1.0.
And I'll add to this, just to review what our federal requirements are at the elementary and middle and also at the high school levels. Currently you have academic achievement, which includes reading and math assessments. That's what we currently do, is reading and mathematics, and that's status only. The other part for elementary middle is the other academic indicator, which we use currently, the change portion. That's the change that we have with the results in reading and mathematics. So change is a part of that other academic indicator. One of the big changes here would be moving from change to student growth to fit into this model, into the new model. So that's something to keep in mind. English language proficiency is also included as part of the federal requirement. And then for full transparency, that last piece, that as far as elementary and middle, is you have to have a school quality or a student success indicator. So some of the discussions is we still are going to give a science assessment, and we want to give a science assessment because we want to see where our kids are in science. But also too, we have to report that. So the question is, would we use science and still report it in its own capacity, but not include it in that overall model of trying to get a score for ATSI, TSI, and CSI? So that's some of the discussions that are going on now. And then, there's been do you include the quality climate and survey, or do you include another indicator? Because there's even been some discussion, instead of it saying any of those, do you include chronic absenteeism? It's all because some states do that. They use chronic. So there's a lot of discussions on how to handle that school quality or student success part. What exactly do we put in there? And that's one of the questions I talked to Superintendent Biggerstaff about input, and we're very open to hear what you have to say about that. From the high school standpoint, we have academic achievement, which is, again, results in reading and mathematics, English language proficiency, graduation rate. Then you also have the school quality or student success, which really is our post-secondary readiness. So having that post-secondary readiness in there. So if you look at what we have here, I believe we've streamlined the federal accountability about as much as we can, with still a decision point in there. So I just wanted to kind of review that for everyone. As far as, of course, in our quality, we currently use science, social studies, and writing as part of the assessment of the federal, and science, social studies, and writing as part of the assessment too. But we've actually tried, how do we move that into the local piece? Dr. Stafford, was there anything I missed there?
No, you hit it right on the.
Well, I'm using my handy dandy resource page. Yeah, we have the same one. That way I can go back and reference this each time. So those are some of the discussions, and there's a lot of other great questions too, but we want to hear your input as we look at what's next. So again, we'll open the floor for questions.
One thing I will add to the conversation is just the thought of student growth is valued. When we talk with parents, I think it's critical that we're able to show them your student start out at point A, and over the course of time, we've moved them to a new level. And so I think that conversation with parents, with our communities, that we're moving kids forward, particularly in reading and math, is critical. The other concern that I have, I guess, is the science current assessment that we have. I feel like I have some very strong science teachers. And over the past several years, when the individual data comes out, I want to fire them. Because our scores are very, very low. Then we get where we stand amongst the state, all of a sudden I'm patting them on the back again, because across the state, that's been a tough climb for all of us. So I think as far as expanding that assessment out to 3, 4, 6, 7th, and 9th grade, I love the through process, but our current assessment might be a place to revisit that assessment piece from the standpoint of where are we at as far as how we're measuring our students in science. That's a quick thought from my perspective.
Sure. Thank you.
So I'm
And-
gonna
and-
pick.
Go ahead.
This is Henry Webb. I'm just going to piggyback on that. I just talked to Jennifer about that very subject. I appreciate her talking to me about that. I don't think science, personal opinion based on data I've collected, I don't think science scores are currently indicative of the performance of our teachers or kids in Kentucky. So I would agree that science does not need to be included in that measure at all. It can still be reported like we've always done. But I just have a couple of questions real quick. Commissioner Fletcher, basically, as I see this, I want to commend everybody for listening, by the way. The change, thank you all so much for continuing to get input. That is, from my opinion, and people I'm talking to, that is valued immensely. Thank you, thank you. But as I see it written currently, especially in early phases, very few districts are going to be able to do local accountability early phases. So we're going to have pretty much everything we have now, and then we're going to add vibrant learning experiences, and then we're going to add through course assessment. So nothing's coming off the plate. We're adding those two pretty significant things. So we're making it a little more complex, not easier. And on top of that, I would like to, from Jennifer, somebody talk more about this through course assessment. Is it going to be a through course assessment, or is it a norm reference kind of assessment like MAP, like we're doing now? Thank you.
So the design of the particular interim assessments has not been considered as of yet, because we're in the phase of trying to figure out if this is something that stakeholders want. But with that, the idea is that the interim assessments would provide instructional relevant information so that it would impact the student, the parent, and the teacher, and those educational leaders almost immediately, because we know that our summative assessment does not give instructional information to the level and degree that our teachers want. And so the vision for those interim assessments is to provide instructionally relevant information so that it can be utilized for instructional purposes for the student.
Now, I'm sorry, Superintendent Webb, there was another question that you had as far as the outside the interim. What was the other one again?
It was basically adding two significant pieces to the accountability model.
Okay.
With vibrant learning experiences and through course assessment. With everything else still on the table, especially early on when districts can't or may not be able to choose local accountability, the system's growing immensely.
Yeah. One of the things that we've talked about is how do we phase that in? You know, if we look at these assessments taking over, you know, moving out of the old accountability and these assessments taking over, not having both assessments going on at the same time. The phase-in approach is more around the local accountability of how do we phase that in. Now, one of the great, there's been some suggestions there, and we're still considering all those suggestions of, do we look at providing a framework model for what local accountability could be for a district? That way that we understand there's small districts, that this would be a heavy lift. So would we put together a framework of, you could either opt into your own local accountability, or do you have this other local accountability that includes vibrant learning, maybe social studies and writing, included with the federal altogether for a local accountability model, so that people could have that opportunity to phase in to their own and learn versus just saying, okay, you got to have a local accountability model within 3 years. So there's a lot of considerations there of what we're trying to do, Superintendent Webb, is make sure we don't overlap and we don't double test, we don't triple test. We really want to try to make this as streamlined as possible. And I think that phase-in process that you pointed out, we need to be very careful so that we don't double our testing time. We don't want to do that at all.
So, Commissioner, based on what you just said, I get that question a lot. The local elements, the local accountability model. People ask me, is it encouraged? Is it going to be something that's mandated that we have in place? So, based on what you said,
we would really encourage everyone to move to a local accountability model along with the federal. There's the federal piece still, but also have that local accountability piece. But if you don't opt into that local accountability, the suggestion out there is, do we offer something else that adds to that? And probably the major thread that we'd look at is the vibrant learning experiences, and what does that look like from again, looking at these suggestions of how do you handle that from a local accountability standpoint.
And I've got just a couple points here, if I can share those. And number one is just a concern that was brought to my attention from others. I know some of the cool members have come to me and just said, I know it's probably a pretty large group, I'm guessing. I watched one of the meetings and it looked like there were several in that meeting. Just that some of this does not reflect their feedback. So they just wanted me to bring that before you all as a concern. no more, no less. And I said I would do that, and just so their voices could be heard. They want those to be heard. So
And
I would
that's,
encourage them to reach out.
yeah, one of the major things we heard from the Cool Council was the science aspect.
Okay.
So that's one of the things when we're talking about taking their feedback, that was one of the major suggestions was how do we handle that science part. So again, that directly came from some of the Cool Council. Now, honestly, there's some members of the Cool Council think we should keep science in, but there is a strong voice within that
I heard
about
both.
pulling it out. Yeah.
The other would be caution. Trying to think through this just a little bit, but I think there are real discussions about what's going to happen to federal dollars, what's going to happen to the U.S. Department of Education. And I don't think those are just political angles. I think there are real discussions based on conversations I've had in the last day or two. So what happens if federal dollars are routed to the state and all this changes? Do we really need to have something in place that we're going to be looking at changing? Or is it better to have something in place? I guess that's the question. But if all this changes in the next 12 months, I know this goes to the 2026 legislative session, but if things completely change, then what, are we better off or worse off?
I think regardless of what change you see at the federal level, I think this is a good model. Now, when we say requirements, of course, a lot of our federal pieces build around that federal model. But if I could design one, and regardless of what happened, I think this is moving in that direction of what I would like to see. I don't want to say regardless of federal requirements, but as we move forward, having that growth and with students and have that a part of accountability, because our parents really ask for a measure of comparability. How do we compare with other districts? So that's that math and reading piece, but also too, that local accountability in order to build trust and getting that input. I think this is a good process regardless of what happens at that point. Now, again, there's a lot of questions about what happens with federal funding, what happens with there, but I think this is an excellent model regardless of what happens at the federal level.
And then just a few points to consider that I may note of, some from me, some from others. But, we know reading and math, that summative assessment is required. My question is on the formative assessment. I think we all probably do that. I mean, to some extent. I mean, those are local measures that we take to ensure that teaching is taking place, that learning is taking place. We just switched from MAP to iReady. I've gotten a lot of questions on, are you going to dictate what we use? We would hate to be using iReady. We just switched from MAP, and you go say, well, we got to go back to use MAP. There's a reason we're using iReady, because we think it's better. Mm-hmm. I like having that in place. I do throughout the year. But if there's no freedom, I think there's going to be a lot of concern and pushback from that. But I think it's important to have that in place to show, to ensure that teaching and learning is taking place. And you still have that summative piece at the end of the year to report upon to ensure that as well. So that's one thought I had. A lot of positives, and we've heard it in here today on the growth versus change, just nothing but positives. Put that out there. A lot of positives on the transition readiness, the graduation rate, that element, just nothing but positives that I hear from. I think you need to hear those things as well.
Oh, thank you so much for that.
I do hear, if you look at the quality of school climate and safety, them like to bring that back into, I've heard that several times, the federal element. Mm-hmm. I've heard that a lot.
That's also come from the Kentucky United We Learn Council too. So we've heard that too, is that piece of adding that in there.
And then the other thing is, we have a lot of vibrant learning experiences in Greene County. We do. There's a lot of things that take place. I don't know that any of you coach cross country, but I'm an old cross country coach. The things that we did every single day were local measures. Every single day that were local measures. What I did in Greene County was different than what they were doing in Johnson County. What we went out there every single afternoon and did was a local measure. And I think we do a lot of those things inside our schools each and every day. And I'm pretty passionate about it. You know, even through the course of the year, there was formative assessments. When I was a cross country coach, we would go to invitationals, we would go to dual meets. Sometimes those races would be 5Ks, sometimes they would be 3Ks, sometimes we would have time trials of 1 mile just to test to see where our kids are. But we were always gearing up for the 2 big races, the regional meet and the state meet. And we got down to that regional meet and the state meet, we were all running the same distance. We were all running that 5K to see who was the best. So my question is, do we as educators feel like it's important to know where there are pockets of excellent teaching and high levels of learning taking place across the state so that we can look at those places, so that we can share ideas, share thoughts? Can we get there by this model or not?
Well, I'll start off with
know
your
what you're-
through, I'll start off with your through course. This, one of the things that we would have to do is put out an RFP. And if we're going to talk about comparability, you're going to have a uniform system. So our thoughts are that to put out an RFP to say these are the parts of the account of the through course we'd like to have. And honestly, something that we've been discussing in small groups is also looking at providing grade level equivalency as part of, not exactly saying that's part of the overall model, but a lot of times when you ask people what's proficiency, they're unable to answer that because of how the standard setting, it's an intense process of how proficiency is set with bringing in different people to look at data and moving from there. But also too, what does that look like as far as a grade level equivalent? Because I'd love to be able to also tell a parent, you know, based on the state accountability results, your child's at grade level or better. So in order to have comparability, there would have to be a uniform assessment. And so, you know, you could put in the through course, which I get a lot of positives about that, and using your iReady and MAP windows that you have now. I suppose that a district could still give the others, but that's a lot of testing going on. We don't want to go that route, I don't think. So would there be another model? Could we just look at saying, can some districts use iReady, some use MAP? I don't think we would be able to do that just from the comparability piece for CSI, TSI, and ATSI. Now, as far as the looking at the local accountability, I believe when we have districts working together to develop those local accountability models, that's the opportunity for us to highlight the successes that are going on in our districts. High quality teaching, high quality, again, getting us to where we're lifting each other up and that we're working together. It gets closer to that. We still have a long way to go, but I do believe a part of that, developing that local accountability model and having cohorts of districts working together is a good way to do that. And also having that third party to come in to also point out, these are the exemplars that's going on across the state. For example, if you have a district we've talked about as far as if we pull out science, maybe even looking at some, and this was a suggestion from the Cool Council, of maybe trying to develop competency-based assessments for science within the local accountability if districts want to do that. So what exactly does that look like? Having a district that pilots those type of things, and then now this is an exemplar. If you want to utilize that, you can as part of your own local accountability. So again, having districts work together in cohorts, then also having that third party to come in and review is a part of that, highlighting the great things that are going on in our districts as we move forward. I hope that answers what you were having to say there. Others? Also, too, I want to take an opportunity to thank so many of you have reached out to other superintendents and sent us some great feedback from superintendents. We're taking note of all that, too, as we move forward. But I just want you to know we appreciate it. As you reach out to others, you can still continue to do that. So reach out to those people that you represent and say, hey, we have other suggestions, other questions, because we want to hear that. Again, a 2.0 is on its way. We're just a long way from getting there. And we, of course, we also want to meet with the Kentucky Board of Education to see their thoughts. I want to talk to a couple of legislators to say, you know, hey, this is where we are. As a matter of fact, almost at the same time, one of our legislators actually said, Dr. Fletcher, what about a federal and a local accountability model? I said, well, it's funny you should say that. And so I really appreciate where some of our senators, it was a senator, as a matter of fact, that brought that idea up. And I love that idea. I said, and I'll tell you why. And I went through where we were at that point with that senator. So also trying to talk to legislators to get their input of what they believe is the best path moving forward. Again, just to reiterate, there is that level of comparability from math and reading. And also, too, if we move that survey back into the federal and take out the science, again, we're going to report science. We want to make sure that we're focused in on looking at how we move forward in science. As a matter of fact, Rhonda and Jennifer both shared at the Superintendent's Advisory Council of what's happening in the fall as it relates to science, because we have some field test questions that are being implemented in. That looks at a different way of assessing some of the science. Now, we still got other things we have to do from the assessment standpoint. We understand that, but also too, making sure that we get the quality of across the board, not just science, but everywhere, that we keep lifting our kids up. And the last thing I'll say about a local accountability, if any district proposes a local accountability model where they're 100% across the board, then it's not worth the paper or the websites posted on. It should be about growth. And there's been a lot of discussion is, do you include a local accountability to be a percentage of an overall accountability? And to me, if you do that, then you're challenging districts to make it a checkbox and to say, I want to get all 25% of my points, and not really making an authentic, genuine assessment at the local level where they can say, how do I grow? And again, lifting each other up. So that's another question we've been discussing, is making sure that districts have as much autonomy as possible, as much flexibility as possible at local part, because we want them to listen to their local business leaders, their parents, and things of that nature too.
I'll say I love the formative piece added in. I think it's very smart and strategic on your part to try to use the formative assessments in order to help all children grow from grade level to grade level. I think that's a great strategy in order to do that. But my question is this. Typically, we think of formative assessment and using that to drive instruction and in the classroom for teachers to use that piece in order to help them. Are we talking, I thought I heard you say that would just be for that purpose of the formative assessments would be used for just allowing teachers to use that piece. Is it going to be considered part of the model as far as, looking from grade level to grade level and counting it in the accountability model, or for teachers? That's my first question.
I think the discussions we have is, if we're going to look at the growth piece, is look at the end of the year for, like, where is a student in third grade versus the end of fourth grade versus the end of fifth grade versus the end of sixth grade. Then that the through parts, the first two parts, will be very similar to the process that you use with iReady or MAP or others, to how does that inform instruction on the next day. So the formative pieces, as we have it now, the suggestion that we have now is not for it to be a part of accountability, but to be provided so in order to get to that formative piece at the end, but also be used in instruction. So right now, those formative pieces are not measured, if you will, as far as a part overall as a number within the accountability model. Would you agree with that, Dr.
Yes, that's what is. You wanted those formative assessments to be utilized for instruction. When you start putting formative into accountability, it changes the nature of that, and you don't want.
Right. That's why I was asking.
Yeah.
I thought I heard you say that, but then I've also heard, I wasn't certain where we landed on whether it's going to be for instructional purposes or if it's going to be part of the model. My second question is, if we're going to do that, and I love that, again, I'll say that, I keep saying that because I think it's smart. I think it helps us help children. I think it helps us show growth from one grade level to the next, but it also helps us help teachers know what it is that they're supposed to be learning at what piece of time within the school year. So my second question is around, are we going to, and is there any consideration of putting together pacing guides and or standards and understanding where it is in time? If we're going to do formatives and we allow teachers to use those, let's just say we give those like we do MAP 3 times a year. Typically, we give those in the fall, we give those in the winter, we give those in the spring. So teachers understand what benchmarks that their children are supposed to be reaching at a period in time. That helps us, again, drive that instruction, and that would help us with science. If we were able to determine what curriculum is it that we're expecting our children to learn at any point in given time, that allows us to be able to help our teachers use that data for standards mastery. So is there any consideration to really looking at what those pacing guides, we know the standards, we understand the standards at each level, we're able to take those standards and we're putting them into pacing guides, and we're able to pace it out throughout the school year. And we're able to take our, we use MAP instead of iReady in Anderson County. So what that allows us to do is see where our children are performing at those benchmark times. So and what we've taught, what we haven't taught. We also know that MAP doesn't have a ceiling. We know that. So my question is, are we really looking at those curriculum pacing guides, not just the MAP, not just the overall standards, and saying each school district is allowed to be able to make their own? Is there going to be some sort of document that allows us to do that for reading, writing, math, science, and social studies, so that we're able to reach those benchmarks? Because that will be the key to helping us with the formatives and using those for the overall summative, which is going to be the KSA.
Well, I'll try to tackle that question, and that's a great question, because one of the things that we looked at as an obstacle of making the formative assessments, and again, if you make the interim, they'd be interim at that point. If you made the interim assessments a part of the overall accountability number, if you will, the index overall, then you would want everybody across the state to be on the same pacing guide, and we didn't want to take away that local autonomy. As far as, could we provide maybe a framework of a pacing guide? We could, but and as we move through and we develop that assessment, but I don't think that we want to say something to dictate to people, this is what your pacing needs to be, because how is that handled within the local community? So again, could we do a framework pacing guide? We probably could. We hadn't really thought that through, but one of the reasons why we didn't include, and other reasons too, but one of the factors that went into that, not including the interim assessments or formative assessments, was that we didn't want to say this is where everybody has to be at this point. Now, of course, with that final goal in mind, are we looking for ways to help districts? Absolutely. If a district says, hey, this would be something that we could be very helpful, then we could try our best to kind of put those things together. The other thing too that I'll touch on, Superintendent Mitchell, that you said, was talking about the formative assessments being a part of the overall model. What we're saying is the formative assessments are there for you if you want to use that as part of your local accountability. So if you wanted to include that, you could. You don't have to, because we're not including in our federal calculation or anything of that nature. So when we say that the formative assessments are a part of the model, it's an option in the model for local parts if that's something that a district wanted to add. So, some districts give benchmark assessments, and like, for example, when you're benchmark, they'll provide that to their community every so often. So if you want to do that, you can. So that's the idea with the formative assessments. Dr. Stafford, any comments on the pacing guide? Or
Yeah, I would with the development of the interim assessments, it'll be a transparent process. Bring in Kentucky teachers, developing the items toward that. I could see blueprints, if you will, and frameworks in which that teachers would know what was going to be on the assessment and what they could anticipate their students encountering.
So with the science, we've been talking about science for a couple of years, and we know that and I've asked this several times in this meeting, with bridging all of, whether it be AP, whether it be whatever curriculum, science standards in general, what that looks like. If there was an opportunity to have that measured together or blended together, I think that would really help us with science, because what we have right now are science standards. We have multiple ways to measure that. We have multiple classes at the high school level in order to measure that. Elementary, we have one. Middle school, we have one. High school, we have multiple. Our children across, and I know that this is not just for Anderson County, Greene County, I'm sure you have this too, and all the counties. Our children take AP exams. They score 3, 4, and 5 on AP exams across the state, and they reach those measures. They take ACT assessments, and they score in the 30s on all of them. And when you look at those same students taking the KSA exam, that does not triangulate. Our students perform lower on the KSA assessment in comparison to their performance on advanced placement exams and the ACT. So why is that? There has to be a disconnect between what it is that they're assessing and what it is that our standards are asking our teachers to do, or the common understanding of what it is that we're teaching in the classroom. So there's a disconnect somewhere. We got to figure that out. To your point with the teachers making those exams, I understand that. The question is that what is the alignment? And if we start with the alignment and understand what it is that we're supposed to be assessing, Our teachers for AP exams are teaching the AP content. They are very proficient in it. They train in it. They understand it. They train our children how to take those exams, and they're very good at doing that. We train our teachers and our children how to prepare for the ACT. My question is, what can we do for the KSA in order to make all of that triangulate so that we're able to get our children more proficient in science?
I tell you what, let us take what your input is there and see what we look at as far as the science assessment moving forward. So I think this is all great input. I just don't think I could answer that question today. That's again, you're making very valid points, and honestly, I agree with probably 99.9, maybe if not 100% of what you're saying is when we compare the others. Now, the only thing I will say is the science test is a different type of test as when you compare to the others because. You know, if you look at the idea of a phenomenon, and the way I understand the science assessment, a lot of times you're going to get a very long passage that explains a science phenomenon that goes through an integrated science approach over different subjects. And we don't teach it that way typically at the high school level. We teach biology, we teach chemistry, we teach physics. You do have some intro to science and physics. You do have some integrated science classes that are there. But the way that with the science assessment now, with those very long passages, a large part of it's also a reading assessment too. So let us take all your input. And as we look at the next iteration of science, we also have some standard setting after we implement the new, I'm sorry, not the new, but the field test science questions as we move forward. So great question. I just don't have an answer for it right now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Is there, and I may have missed it somewhere, has there been discussion of ACT and where that falls going forward?
There has been two discussions about ACT. One discussion with two different parts. One presentation is, right now ACT is not a part of an accountability number. So it's not added in as you're in part of the federal accountability currently, nor is it moving forward. Where ACT falls in is if you get the benchmarks 18, 19, or 20 in English, reading, and mathematics, then that is a check mark or you get credit for that in your transition readiness. So that's basically where it is. But right now we give it to every student to take the ACT. There are some discussions out there of do we require every student to take the ACT? And here's the two, and anybody can chime in and give me some information there that they would like to add to this discussion is a lot of our colleges are not requiring the ACT anymore. Should we require it? Should we give it to every student? But also too, it's hard to find a scholarship that's offered that doesn't include the ACT, and maybe I'm missing some things there. Now, the other argument is if we give every single student the ACT, and since it's not really moved into an overall index, if a student takes it, do they see like, okay, now college is an option for me? Maybe I wasn't thinking about going to a four-year college before. Somehow I pulled out a 24 or 25, and now it's an option for me. And not, trying to get away from that where adults say, you should take the ACT, you shouldn't take the ACT. We'd like for all students to take the ACT and then let them decide. And again, both are good arguments. Do you require others? Because if you look at it, there's only 9 states across the country that have all students to take the ACT at some point. And I will say Kentucky ranks 3rd in our composite. We were 2nd last year, and Wyoming kind of inched in there this time. Of course, they only test like 5,000 students, I think, 5,000 or 6,000 students. But that being said, of the states that require all students to take it, we are 3rd of the 9. So it's technically not a part of the accountability model in that it's an added number. The question is, do we continue to have to give the ACT to all students? That's the big question. And be happy to hear your all's thoughts on that.
I do have one more question that's not related to the ACT. My question around the merging of the local school quality measures and the federal school quality measures, is that going to be a percentage or is it just going to be, is it a complicated formula that we all need to understand and know before we give additional input, or is the local model really truly going to be something that we report out locally to our school and our community so that they understand the things that we value and that we are able to meet the needs of our community? Or is it going to be a measure or a percentage of a measure within the overall accountability model?
Currently is not a percentage of the overall accountability model. And just like we talked about earlier, and the reason for that is we want to have districts to say you have that local autonomy. We don't want you to feel pressured to give yourself all 25% or all 50% of the over. We want it to be genuine and authentic and actually give a number so that you don't feel any pressures. We want to say, okay, the pressure that you're giving there is, what do we owe to our local community? What do we owe to our students? What do we owe to the people around us to say, this is what we value as a local community, and this is how we want to grow towards that goal. So as of right now, we don't have local accountability as a 50% of the overall index. It is separate. The federal will be the other. Now going back to that, so I hope that answers that question. And again, we're willing to listen to comments about that too. This is open, but you've heard the two arguments about ACT. We've also talked about the local accountability piece there. So as of right now, no, it's not an overall number.
I mean, I think I'll say, first of all, I'm really excited about the idea of districts collaborating and learning from each other. I think that's pretty awesome. I think when we get together and collaborate as superintendents, we learn a whole lot from each other, and we call each other to get answers. And so I think it only makes sense that we do that. I love the through coursework as well. I'm a little torn on the ACT. I wasn't until just a few minutes ago. Until I became a CTE principal, I probably would have said everybody should take the ACT. And a lot of me wants to continue to say everybody should take the ACT because we need to figure out ways to compare the successes of our kids nationally too. I realize that to me, the ACT has always been something that kids carry with them and people actually use. We give them all this assessment outside of our internal data, like our state assessment, and they don't take any of it anywhere. They don't use it for anything. The ACT has always been that one they can use. And I think that's important, but I also think we have kids who are going to go in directions who are going to be very successful and never need the ACT. And so, I think that's my struggle a little. Do we have that kid take it anyway? Maybe a kid who's going to struggle on those on some areas there because they're much better at technical math and they're much better. And we did that a little bit with COSA and things like that a long time ago. And it's gone somewhere, I think. But so I'm a little torn. I do think we have kids who take the ACT with no benefit at all. I also do think there's something to be said about comparing our kids nationally. Because we have this real responsibility to prepare our kids to not only be really great in our local community, but to be able to spread their wings and go wherever. And so I think I would just hate for us to miss that opportunity, but I understand why we wouldn't. The survey is something that I'm hung up on a little bit. I hate for a survey to be an accountability measure in any way. I just think that and let me say this for the people who are listening that now hate me. I hate the science test in the current standard. We're reporting a measure that we all clearly understand is an error. And if we had those kinds of results in a classroom, we would tell a teacher they need to either change the way they're assessing or they need to change the way they're teaching. And yet we're reporting that as a measure in the state to our federal government, who then people come back and criticize our state for not knowing how to be successful in science. And I don't think that's true. I think we've got, and you explain that much better than I can. That's why I hate that I'm following you. But that being said, I just think a survey is a survey. And I think any of us who have worked with kids understand that their input on our schools is so important. And yet it changes sometimes every day too. And so I think just like the through course with assessment and watching kids grow, I think kids change with their mindset. I mean, if I have an inflatable party that morning, feed them their very favorite lunch and then give them the survey, it's going to go pretty well. If that same morning, we gave them two state assessments, and then we gave them the survey, it's going to go less well. We know that. We know that in
in the TEL survey one time, I was a principal of a school that they didn't have morning duty, they didn't have lunch duty, they didn't have after school duty, they didn't have any after school events. And the thing they marked me down the most on in the TEL survey was that they had too many duties. So I brought them together and said, can somebody explain to me what duty you have? Because I'd worked in other places, they hadn't. So they just felt like me asking them to come out in the hallway for 5 minutes between classes was absolutely outrageous. And I get that because they'd never done that before. And so I think when we talk about a survey, I think we need to be gathering this data and this information. Obviously we have to, but also I think we should be doing it more than once a year. I think we should be having those conversations more than once a year. But to say that that should be something that we report federally because it's accurate, I think I think we're missing the mark. That I think if we're going to do this kind of work and try to make these kind of changes, maybe we're selling ourselves short if we say these are the only two things we can report there. Maybe we need to be a little more creative as to what can fit in the, and I'll be honest, I don't know. I didn't know until you said it, what even was that piece that had to be reported. So I'm not the right guy to answer that part. I'm just saying I'm really concerned when I hear, let's do a survey, let's do a survey. I just think that it can have all forms of, it can take all forms on any day. You know, a kid makes a threat the night before and then you ask them if they feel safe at school, even though you did everything in your power to have that kid safe at school the next day. They obviously feel a little less safe than they did the day before because they heard, because you were transparent to your community, that they might have been unsafe for a couple hours in the middle of the night. And so then you corrected it, you had them safe, but they still have that in the back of their head. I just think that there's a whole lot of pieces to that on any given day. To say one day of a kid taking a survey that takes 30 minutes, it's hard for me to say that a school should be placed in TSI, CSI, or any other category based upon that. While I also think that in any of our local accountability models, we should be measuring that consistently to find out what our kids have to say about their learning experience. And I think it's a lot like we've talked about with some other measures. In some measures, if we make them part of a bigger accountability piece, they lose their value. And I think we have to be careful with that it serves its purpose. Its purpose is for us to hear our kids, to talk to our kids. They are who we serve every day. We should want to talk to them, but we should not be talking to them out of force so we can have another measure. The federal I may be totally missing the mark there, and I'm fine to say we'll do a survey too. It's fine. And the only other thing I'd say is I just hope that we really encourage. When we use the word encouraged in the school quality measures, things like writing, hope we really encourage that. Our kids, we have to teach people to communicate, and communication is both in the written form and then in the vocal form, and people will say I'm too long-winded in both. But you know, we have to send our kids out, and so I worry that if we don't have a real push across the state to teach our kids how to communicate in the written form, we might be missing just a little bit. And so I know that that's not something that is necessarily obligated in any standard anywhere as far as federal requirements or within the state. I just think that when we think about that communication piece, it's really significant, and I worry just a little if we don't push hard on that. And I know y'all will. I know there's a desire for writing, and as I mentioned in the last meeting, I know Mr. Ray is very and you have a new name.
Marinelli. Marinelli.
Yes, thank you. I didn't want to get that. I knew I could get Ray right, and so you know, I know that you have a lot of voices, and she's been referenced by my folks who are concerned about the writing piece. But I know all of us care about it. I just worry about the word encouraged right there, if it's strong enough.
Well, the first comment I'll make is a few years ago when I first heard the name Mickey Ray, I thought it was her middle name because it was always Mickey Ray. It was never Mickey. It was Mickey Ray. So, but it was her last name. Now it's Marinelli. So that's first. And then the few things that, just to kind of make some comments about some things you're talking there, is with the survey, you know, we've had some people talk about, should that be included or should it not? And do we look at other measures? And we talked about chronic absenteeism. Is that something we want to include in that? That would be something that other states are doing. Or do we look at vibrant learning? Do we put that in there? So it doesn't have to be survey or science. I think the big question is, do we move science out? And I'm hearing that's a yes. And but what do we put back into that slot? And of course, right now, the survey is only 4% of the overall. I think that was by design because of the subjectiveness of the survey. So, but also too, you have a lot of people say, well, can we use that survey, then add parts that will be more locally relevant questions that we could do in our local accountability. So there's opportunities that you can design that survey so that it could be in your local accountability as you move forward. So great points on the survey. How do we utilize that? Where do we put it? Agree with a lot of what you're saying there. As far as the ACT, one of the other points that was brought up and I'm trying to listen to both sides and where do we go? And somebody brought up the point like, okay, if we don't require all students to take it, would we still be able to offer it sometime during the week because of those students that wouldn't be able to come back on a Saturday? And then making sure we give them that opportunity and access that they deserve. So that's another question we'd have to answer. If we if we say we're not going to give it and require all students to take it, could we also do that where it's given during that week? So there's a lot of questions in there. And then also from the writing piece is the balance of trying to streamline federal requirements, because we've heard that resoundingly. We want to streamline the federal requirements, but also too we know that first of all, civics is a graduation requirement. We want to make sure that students pass that assessment or have a semester of civics. So we're making sure that we keep our social studies as important too. It's still a graduation requirement, but I agree with you with writing, because if you look at, I don't think you can find a portrait learner in the state that doesn't have communication as part of that. So written communication would be a big part of that too. So what does that look like if you include it in local accountability and strongly encourage that it be there? So, but also too, giving districts local autonomy, how they do that. Some districts, I'm going to say something. If you guys throw anything at me, I understand. What if districts want to do writing portfolios? That's up to them. That's not something you're going to hear from us to say you got to do a writing portfolio.
I'll put that in the system. I want to go back on everything I just said. I want to be clear. I'm not lobbying for that.
So with that being said, you're not lobbying for noted. I've got it in my notes here. But how a district feels like it's the best way to assess writing in their district, and that as a communication is something if you put that into our local accountability, also identifying those exemplars of this is how it's assessed in writing in Pikeville, and this is what it looks like for others. That way you have those exemplars to look at. So again, with the ACT, I understand the struggle there. The survey, I understand the struggle. And so as you can see with 1.0, we still have some decisions to make, but we've got something on paper now. It's like, okay, what revisions do we like here and amendments?
So just to chime in, great discussion. I think it exemplifies, and we've talked about this before, the diversity across the state of Kentucky. 7 very distinct regions. If you go back to your old Kentucky history and Kentucky geography, and from the bluegrass to the knobs and the eastern and western Kentucky coal fields and the pennyroyal, and it's just a very diverse state, and every community is so different, and the values and the norms are so different. I love the idea of streamlining and simplifying the state accountability and the federal accountability. I think I shared with you a document that I believe it was KVEC did a few years ago, and it had over 220 some changes to the accountability system since like 1992, and that was in 2019. And the one thing I hear from people is, let's simplify that state and federal accountability model, and let's stick with it. So let's get to one and stick with it. Number 2, you hear a lot about ACT, this industry cert. Let's go back to the student and think about that. We focus on an individual learning plan for students and their pathway, and it looks different for every student. So let's think about, I'd love to see the ACT as an opportunity if a student needs that. For many, that's where they're going to get that is in the school, but also, it might be an industry cert for another student. Let's make sure we provide that opportunity for our students and our pathways. I've got a unique story. A young lady who's super smart, 4 and 5s on AP courses, took every high level course she could take, but she also went across the street to the ATC because she wanted to be an engineer, and she's at MIT. We've only had 2, I think, in MIT and to go to MIT that we're aware of, and but she wanted hands-on practical application courses there at the ATC to help her with understand the practical side of the engineering. So, very unique situation. I think we have to really think about the individual learning plans of students.
Point.
And so let's make sure that I love, we're working on our profile of a learner. It's in really good shape right now. We're in that rollout model time frame. I love the vibrant learning experience. I love all that side on the local accountability. I understand that's going to look different in different places. I read somewhere that there's research that suggests, we spend a lot of time focusing on absenteeism, but also read somewhere that being bored at school has the same effect level. It's negative 0.46 if you're bored at school or if you're absent from school. So let's think about that. We've got to make sure that our students are engaged and inspired every day. And that's getting harder to do because we're in a transformative world that is so digital and how do you compete with that in the education world? And it happens through those vibrant learning experiences and those individual pathways and programs. And so let's keep that in mind. I'm a huge fan of a local accountability model, although it needs to look differently in it should look differently everywhere. And one last thing, I hope, I didn't like one thing I heard, and that was coming up with the RFP for a formative and a final summative assessment program being consistent across the state. I hope that you can write an RFP that has companies that provide those services meet some type of a comparability or validity level in relationship to whatever standard we're trying to reach, so that if one district is using one and another's using another, that you could use either one of those, kind of like we do with HQIR. You all vet and identify HQIR resources, and districts get to pick and choose from those. I hope that we wouldn't be, we used to be a MAP district, and we have recently changed to iReady as well for some of the same reasons that Will spoke about. And I'd hate to see that our system would mandate that everybody go to a different system. I think that would drive those decisions for the whole state, and could be detrimental in some places. So I'm just sharing those things. And also remind everybody, keep in mind what the current high school graduation requirements are and how they impact what we assess and what those assessment results are. We don't have a set standard of science courses at the high school level that we're assessing for. We have standards. We don't have courses. And so how do we make sure that those standards are all being taught that are being assessed? So that's a tough thing. So I'm not for science in the accountability model, especially at the high school level.
And again, that's one of the things at that high school model, we do have for lack of a better word, an assessment, or actually our post-secondary readiness fits into that bucket. So science doesn't necessarily have to be a part of that, but we still have to give a science assessment. One of the things that you point out, talking about absenteeism, and you gave a great argument for why we're pushing so diligently on vibrant learning. Because really, if you look at the heart of vibrant learning, it's what's relevant. I think Superintendent Hodges pointed out some of the things that are going on in Greene County, and all of us could point to things that are going on. And I'll use my son as an example. When he decided that he wanted to be a welder, he would get up at 5 a.m. to drive to ACTC for that period of time without one time mom or dad ever having to get him up. Now, before he decided to be a welder, we had to roll him out of bed. So with that being said, if we're offering those relevant experiences that kids enjoy, and I think we are, I think across the state we can do that, but how do we spread that, and how do we make sure we give more and more opportunities regardless of the zip code? And how do we make sure we put those teams together, I think is so important. So I think our best tool, not our only tool, not our only required tool in that absenteeism cabinet is relevance, especially at the high school level. In the elementaries, it's how do you make it vibrant for the parents to get them there? So we understand that. The other parts too is that I'll argue that when you talk about local accountability, I don't think that we can reach our moonshot of being a useful measure or a useful assessment model without having local accountability. because we are so different. You did a great job of pointing out how the differences that you can have just by region. I don't think that we can reach the moonshot without having a local accountability measure in there. So that's a good point also too. I want to just kind of reiterate there. Thank you.
I have one more question. And the question is, has there been any discussion with post-secondary entities around science and what that looks like in preparation at that level in order to help our teachers be prepared to teach high school and or elementary, any teaching of science? And the reason why I asked that is, and I'm going to give you the quick version of the reason why I'm asking that. I think there's been a lot of discussion around science, and I've been very vocal about science for a while. And the reason why is because I think it's important. And I think, reading, writing, math are always our number one. Social studies is very important. I'm a social studies major, so, I'm going to always, advocate for social studies as well. But also, and I do not like science. I'm going to start by saying that is not my strength area. And everybody in my district knows it, and I have no problem sharing that, but my daughter is. And she's an aerospace engineering major. And if it wasn't for Anderson County High School, I'm going to tell you, she would not have the opportunities that she has right now sitting in the University of Alabama, the Huntsville campus, being an aerospace engineering major. And I'll tell you this for a reason. She did all the classes in high school, all the AP classes until she got to her senior year, was unsuccessful to take AP Bio, which she needed to make her schedule work. So therefore, she took a college course at our local college to suffice for that, so that she would have that opportunity to have that college science knowledge before she went on to her post-secondary opportunity. When she got there, she took the accelerated course, and there was nobody, not one teacher that could tutor her at the college level to help her with any questions that she had. I have a very strong curriculum director who is a science biology major, and he did not feel comfortable even tutoring her. So I say all of that to say science is important, and I don't want to get away from saying that. And I know the model is a whole nother important piece that matters, but the knowledge that we are preparing our children to go out and do for post-secondary readiness in their careers is critically important to a lot of children, and preparing them to be competitive across the nation. And it's not just the nation, it's the world. And I think what we have to do is give our best effort to get curriculum in place in order to teach our teachers, if you will, to be able to successfully transition that through our children so that they're prepared to be able to compete at high levels no matter what they choose, whether it be MIT, whether it be UAH, no matter where it is, so that they can be successful in science. I don't want to give up on that, because I think there's a lot of children that need that. There's a lot of children that don't have that natural ability to be able to understand science on their own, and we need to be able to prepare them to be competitive. And, the only way we can do that is to make sure that we're having those conversations with our universities, our colleges, so that our teachers are prepared to come out and be able to prepare our children to pass the KSA, to pass all of the AP courses, to score well on the ACT if they're going to college, the PSAT. We need them prepared, and we need to give them the best that we can so that they have those opportunities to be competitive with students across the nation and the world.
There's been some preliminary discussions, talking with EPPs about, well, first of all, let's go back for just a second. We all know that if you're going to be a high school teacher, you can get a major in math and teach AP Calculus, Algebra 2, Geometry, Algebra 1. You can teach everything in the math course. The difficult part about science is you have to be a biology major to teach biology, or a chemistry major to teach chemistry, or, you have to have your certification in that. So when we start looking at science teachers, they have to be more specialized, which is, that's where we are right now. So what do we do as far as moving forward to making sure that our science teachers are, they feel equipped, to have those students at the level, because if you teach an AP class, that's a whole different level. I taught AP calculus for 4 years. That's another level of mathematics, and I went through a lot of intense training to do that. The same thing happens when you talk about our science teachers. But I think this also begs the question of how much are we paying them? When we start looking at not just our science teachers, but teachers as a whole, is how do we increase teacher pay so that if you're a biology major, that you want to be an educator and you can still support your family. I went through a line at a local store, and what broke my heart was, and I know this is a little bit on the side, there was a teacher checking me out at the register because she has a family and she couldn't afford it, working in Fayette County to also raise her kids. She needed a little extra money for Christmas and some other things of that nature. Now, she didn't know she was talking to the commissioner either. I don't think she did anyway, but I was asking her a lot of questions like that. But that being said, I think we also need to go back and say, okay, are we paying our best and our brightest to go in and be science? What would it take to have your daughter come back and teach engineering classes, physics classes, something of that nature there? It's going to take a little more money. With that being said, to answer your question, there have been some preliminary discussions about making sure that we align everything as far as we move forward to teach science in a way that they're prepared for college, because I hear that comment a lot.
Good, thank you.
Anybody have any other comments, questions? Dr. Fletcher, I just want to tell you that we appreciate you giving us the opportunity to give you feedback. And I think your plan moving forward is a good one, because even though we know that sometimes surveys and feedback can be a challenge, we know that we'll get to the best possible scenario when it comes to the new accountability system. So thank you.
Can I make one final comment?
Sure.
One of the things I want to emphasize is, if you look at the prototype process, there were so many surveys that were getting and changes based on the survey input. When you look at where we're at the framework now, we put this 1.0 so that we can say, okay, where are we? Because sometimes you can listen to everyone and feel like you've captured what everybody says, but when you put it on paper, then that's where the real discussion begins. So I want you to know that we're listening. And there may be some things that even around this table that we don't even agree on. If we talk about the ACT, there's probably some that agree, some that don't agree. I love the idea of how's the ILP fit into that. So to try to listen to the input. So by all means, anytime that you have some input, and I love the fact that many of you have surveyed other superintendents and talked to others and sent that to us, that allows us some food for thought. We're trying our best to capture, first and foremost, what we feel is best for students, but also two, we have a lot of educators. Well, I want to say a largest part of our educators, including our superintendents, include others, know our students very well. So we need to listen, and that's what we're doing. And I want to thank Dr. Stafford and also Rhonda Sims, because every time that we have a discussion, they're like, okay, we didn't think of this. What do you think about this? This was brought up in this discussion. Where are we on this? So there's listening going on. I want you to know that, and we appreciate you so much.
As far as next steps, we have, Clippy, on the next slide, we have, of course, this advisory council. We have the Kentucky Board of Education discussion, the fourth, the Kentucky United We Learn Framework 1.0 will be discussed with the board on the 4th. I anticipate of 2.0 then coming into the town halls. So, and Commissioner Fletcher shared those dates with you. So expect to see 2.0, and then we hope you can join us at your board meeting and then at your town hall that's in your location.
Thank you, Dr. Stack.
Thank you, and happy Thanksgiving to everyone.
Again, does anybody have anything else before we adjourn? Hope everyone has a happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy some relaxation with your family. And thank you again, Dr. Fletcher. Do I have a motion? We adjourn.
Make a motion.
Got the motion, second?
Second.
We're adjourned. Thank you.